Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning to you, depending on where you find yourself in the world. I'm talking to you from South Africa, Cape Town. My name is James Lane. I'm a front-end developer for the Wolfram desktop and working particularly with the 3D graphics on the 3D graphics side of things. Yeah, and I'm excited to tell you guys about some of the new and experimental features we've been working on. Some of those features include a new axis primitive, and this is going to be very useful for creating multiple customizable axes. A new polyhedron primitive we've got for creating arbitrary polyhedra and to create these with holes as well. And also about an advanced or a prototype to help with ray tracing your 3D graphics, and which is a step towards more photorealistic rendering. So I'm going to kick off telling you a little bit about the AxisBox stuff. So this is a primitive for graphics 3D for creating multiple customizable axes. I've made my code here quite small, but basically you'll see the axes sit where you would typically have primitives like line and so on, and you can have multiple of these. Just to say quickly that this is a work in progress. Some of the functionality is in 12.2, but it's really, we need to still polish and knock off the rough edges, and there are a few more options and so on that we need to do. So it's more intended for version 13, as John says, V13. And so basically the kernel team had put together a spec. A huge shout out and thanks to Brett Champion and his team and for their spec. And basically this will be used in a variety of plots, and you could also use it. I don't know if anybody listened to the ggplot talk, and I suspect they're creating axes as well with lines and placing text and so on. And this should make that kind of thing a lot easier since you can customize them. So here's just a quick example of some of the use cases for it, like a multi-axis plot. Here you can see different axes placed around the normal graph. Just to the left and the right, there are multiple axes. They're not being cut off by the plot range, which is one of the features of this new axis primitive, that you can place them. They won't be cut off by the plot range, but they will influence the image range. These are very useful for radial axes plots. You can see these kind of sloped axes coming in, and they can just be quickly pulled together. I just put a little example together where I've got a table of axes, and that's putting all these different axes around, so which is really neat. They'll be great for parallel axis plots like these, where you want multiple axes for the varying dimensions. Also, these are great for like ternary plots, so where you can have sloped axes again, where you can place the axes labels on the sides, on the left, the right, and customize where they're placed. So let me take you into the syntax quickly for these axes primitives. Basically, you'll say, I want an axis. You'll give some position specification, which will describe how the axis is placed. You'll just specify how you want the scale of that axis to correspond to the actual underlying coordinate system, and the options to customize exactly what the axis will look like. So let me kick off with some of the simplest examples. So basically you can, here's some forms. You can say I want a horizontal axis that's going through y equals 1.2. So a horizontal axis through an arbitrary y value. So that would be this one up here. You can see it's able to sit outside of the plot range without being clipped off. Normally if a primitive is outside the plot range, it gets clipped, but these can extend the image range so they can sit around a graphic, which is really useful for like those multi-axis plots. You could also specify that you want a vertical axis. Here, I've got one going through 1.5. So these top two forms are, they basically run across the plot range. You'll see I've put in one of our normal axes here, And these other axes span the plot range, just like those. But you can also constrain for instance, your horizontal axis to run from 0 to 1. So this example over here, we've said the x values of the axis will be constrained between 0 and 1. Or you can, here for the vertical one, I've said they must run from -2 to 0.5. So it's just some very simple ways of creating an axis quickly and in an arbitrary position that you would like. So we also have provision for sloped axes. So let me leave it there before I take us further. So these sloped axes, effectively, this is the same as specifying a line. You've got two endpoints and your axis will be drawn between those. We'll come to all the variations of placing the scale and the direction of that scale along those axes, but here you can see it's just a simple sloped axis or axis. I'm just going to adjust the lighting here slightly. It's shining on me a bit. Here we've got another form of this. You can have, just like with a line, you can have a kind of a polyline. Here your axis can also be a kind of a polyline shape. And we've also got a form where you can specify an infinite line through some points. So you can specify 2 points, and we will draw an axis between those points, and it will run across the plot range. So we've also, Brett also put in the spec that we should support curved axes. This is really cool. I used to work for a CAD company, and one of the things that was very important on their road visualizations, for instance, is to be able to draw the chainages, the distances along the road, along like the center line of the road and so on. And here we can do this kind of thing very easily just with a simple axis. And it can be a curved axis. So that could be a possible use case for these. The form for these is just very simple as well. You just say, I want an axis. You can specify what type of spline it is, B-spline or Bezier, and then the knot points or the control points rather of that curve. And yeah, we wanted these forms to be quite simple to start with. It's still a work in progress, but we've got these different simple forms to get things up and going. Another form is arc. This is still under development, but you can imagine it would probably look like something like the axis around a protractor, for instance, where you've got your ticks around a circle or an arc. And its form would just be axis arc and then your various arguments, and those correspond very closely to our circle primitive. Next up is looking at how do you put a scale on this that maps the actual axis to the coordinates underneath it. So it's going to be axis, then the placement in the scale. So the vertical forms like we had, like this horizontal, where you don't specify endpoints, the kind of the infinite ones. Here what you'll do is you'll map a value on that axis to a value that you want. So you'll map 2 of those values and that will give you the range. So for instance, in this little example, I've said on a horizontal axis going through y equals 1.2. So you can see it's above here. And I've said the value at 0, where that axis is going through 0 effectively, or on the axis must map to 300, and the value where it goes through to 600, or at 1 must be 600. And you'll see it adjusts and sets the axis labels accordingly. Where we in the forms where we specify vertices, like this axis form, which is very close to a line, you basically just specify the values that you would want at the start and end point. So this is for linear scale along these graphs, and we will support log scales and some others. And the infinite line one will work the same, where we've specified 2 points, you specify the value at my first point here, -1 must be 200, the value at my second point must be, in my case, I set it to -100, and then it will put the do the scaling along that for you. So this is all very much for the automatically created axes, labels, and that. But we will have it so you can customize the exact ticks along the axis. In the case of like these vertical ones where you've constrained them, again, it's very simple. You'll just specify what's the value at the first constraint or at the constraint point. So this one's, you can see this axis is running from 0.8 to minus 0.5. And so the value at 0.8, I want it to be 76. And the value at 0.5, I want it to be 53. And so you can see it's got the corresponding values along that. Cool. Curves as well. How do you specify the scale along these? I've also tried to keep this very simple. Here for the curves, it's difficult to specify a point on a curve. Like it's easy often to know you know the control points, but what are the actual points on the curve? So here these values correspond to the start and the end of the curve. So this B-spline curve will start its values at 70 or minus 70, and then they'll range to 70 along the curve. So you've got that control of the scale. And we are going to provision and make support for log scales and arbitrary scales, where you as the user can actually specify how you'd like that scale to work. But that's still a work in progress. We're busy with that. Second, then there's the plethora of options to customize these axes. What do you like? How do you want it to play out? So for instance, here, tick lengths as usual, some simplifications. You'll have your normal where you can specify specific tick lengths for each tick. But here's just a simplification. If you wanted all the same tick lengths, you could just give a single value. Or if you wanted to just specify your major and your minor tick lengths, you could do so. And just adjust those values very simply. Label sides, or rather, I think we should rename this to tick label sides, but you can basically say which side of an axis do we want our labels to be on. The automatic side at the moment is as you're going from your lower values according to your scale to your higher ones. Left would be to the left of that, and right would be, yeah, to the right of those values as you run along that curve from low to high values. So you could say left here my tick labels on the left, here my tick labels on the right. And you can see we still have some work to tidy their placements, but it's underway. You can also say which side you want your ticks to be on. So here, the default, and then you could say I want my ticks on the left, my ticks on the right, and obviously like you can mix these. So you could have label sides and tick sides, and you could say right and right, and then they should all end up on the same sides. So those kind of customizations. Tick label orientation, this is kind of a new one we've been just fiddling with, where you can actually say, for instance, I'd like my tick label. Normally your tick labels are vertical, they're upright, but perhaps you want them as they run along a curve to have the same orientation as the curve, so they follow the axis line. Or you could, we will allow you to specify a degree or an up direction. So like here you can see in this example, I've said, I want these tick labels facing in the direction of -1, 1. And then you get these oriented ticks or rotated ticks. Axis label is going to be the way to put a label on your ticks. You must just excuse this funny little, this expression that's bringing in some of the typesetting. We're still busy finalizing and battening down the typesetting for these, but I just put this in. Didn't really need to, but to be correct, I've just put that in here. So that, get rid of that. and you'll see it still works if I take off the typesetting stuff. Then styling your axes, all the usual. Base style is going to be a role player in styling an axis, so you can specify the base style, default base style. Tick style will set the style of the ticks as usual, and again styling the actual text here. I've wrapped it in a style box, so style orange bold. The tick styles, the ticks are red, and the axis itself is blue, and all those combinations will work similarly to the way our current axes work, and give you just that control of the actual styling of the ticks. There are a lot of other options that are here that are coming as well. So tick label orientation, I've mentioned. We'll be able to allow you to decide which side of your axis you want your axis label to be on, the rotation of the axis label, and some more. So watch this space. This is a feature that is should arrive in version 13 proper, but the startings of it are in version 12.2. So I'd love to show you more and more of these options, but it's time will catch me. So our next option is some work that Yutulu's been doing. Yutulu's an amazing developer on the front-end team. He does great work. It's just so solid. And he's been working on this Polyhedron primitive. This is ready in version 12.2, and you can create arbitrary 3D polyhedra with this. And one of the cool things, just like in, I suppose the 2D equivalent of this is the polygon, and our polygons now can have arbitrary holes in them. And with these polyhedra, you can also put holes in these or kind of cut out inner shapes. So let's just look at a basic single tetrahedron example. Here I'm asking for a polyhedron. And you'll see the way we specify these polyhedra is by providing a set of vertices. Here you can see my vertices, and these are 3D vertices. And then you specify a set of indices which correspond to each of these vertex. So like here, this says one of the faces of this polyhedron will include vertex. It'll basically be constructed out of a triangle including vertex 2, 3, and 4. So vertex 2, vertex 3, and vertex 4. So that's the kind of general format for these polyhedron. You provide your vertices, and then you specify the indices of those. So they're basically index coordinates, similar to our graphics complex, the way we do things here. One thing to note, these polyhedron are kind of first-class objects in the front end and in the software, so you can do all kinds of computation on these polyhedron objects, including drawing them in graphics 3D. So here is this little polyhedron that we've got. It just consists of the 4 sides that were up there, and the faces of it are determined by those indices. There's support for multiple tetrahedra with a shared side. This is just a nice example Yutsu had. These polyhedron basically work with the usual options that we have for faces, and so like you can say vertex colors and provide the vertex colors for the different vertices. You can provide vertex normals, you can texture these, and all those other kind of styling operations. So here's just an example again, vertices, a list of vertices, then the list of faces determined by the indices of those vertices, which of those vertices will form each face. And so like, for instance, one of the faces will be constructed out of vertex 2, 3, and 4, and they've been colored green. So the second vertex would be green, the third one yellow, and the fourth one blue. So we're looking for green, yellow, blue, and that would be effectively this face here. And Yeah, so just as I've mentioned, these are styled by the various forms. So you can say like the face form must be pink, the edge form dashed and thick, and so you can style, yeah, uh, yeah, you can style these tetrahedron. Here's an example where we start to get to holes. Excuse all the, we basically, I'm providing a set of coordinates that I'm going to use for this, a set of sides. These are going to determine the sides of my cuboid that I'm going to get, and then I ask for my polyhedron. And so basically you specify your coordinates when you ask for a polyhedron. Here I've just got it in the raw boxes form. Your coordinates, then you specify the sides, these indexed sides. And then we just have, just like for polygon in 2D, we have an arrow, and then you specify the holes. And these are also determined again just by indexed vertices. So these are the indices that correspond to these vertices, and they'll be used to cut out the holes from this polyhedron. So here you can see we just had a cube, and the holes basically just, they cut out holes in the different faces of the cube. Here's an example I used. Here you can really see how nice these polyhedron objects are. We've got a cuboid, and we've cut out kind of like a rectangular cube hole through the center of it. And here I've just drawn, I've used a clipping plane just to cut away, and you can see inside there's the outer shape, or the outer cube, there's the inner cube, and basically together they form this cuboid object. Just a fun example, you can also have these multiple polyhedron cubes to get, or polyhedra objects together. Here's a polyhedra box, but it's just repeating the shape and the holes multiple times using a rule. So just an example to show you can have multi polyhedra, multi holes working in these forms. And I'll refer you to Yutsu Liu for that. He worked on this and has done a great job, and can just take you through more of the details. I'm running out of time a bit, and now coming to a really exciting area. I've just got a Cornell box here. So I've just put in a bunch of vertices and polygons, and we've implemented a prototype of ray tracing. So here you can see the spiky with some shadows and light bouncing around, as opposed to our normal spiky with just normal, just being rasterized with our normal rendering techniques. So ray tracing is a very hot topic at the moment, and it's being accelerated by GPUs. And recently we rewrote our renderer using metal, and we just bringing in some of the new techniques there. So we're leveraging these 3D APIs, and ray tracing basically brings a metal, and ray tracing bring metal makes ray tracing available for us on the GPU. So this can be done in real time. So when I evaluate that, and I've rasterized that one, but I'll show you in a moment now. This is real time. Just a quick note on this. So this is prototyped in version 12.2, so you can use it if you've got a Mac. And we've kind of just, it's a prototype. So we're still working on it. We haven't brought in all the some of the nice things, but we've kept it so that it should work on most Macs. So you don't need to, I think like it'll work on Mojave and High Sierra, and with most graphics cards. So it's basically just our ray tracing implementation is just a basic path tracing. We tracing rays backwards from the camera into the scene. This is Monte Carlo light transport that it's basically simulating. The options for ray tracing are just very simply simple to get ray tracing. You just ask for the rendering options and we set the rendering method to ray tracing. And I'll come to these options that we have with it, the method options to control the number of image samples and the ray bounces. So basically, ray tracing makes shadows available. So if I do, let me do this one. Okay, here's a great example. Here you can see shadows. This is our normal rendering. You can see it's super fast. It's just rasterizing it. And here you can see it's slower as I rotate it. It's sluggish, but it is interactive. And you can just see the shadows, and we've got soft shadows here. And we're doing that. We've got area lights, which is also a new feature that comes with ray tracing. And yeah, so area lights help you to create soft shadows. You can see the light being reflected off the walls. So for instance, lights, there's a light source above here. Light hits the red wall and reflects off it. And you can just see the red tint falling on these different surfaces. You can see the soft shadows. One of the cool things about ray tracing, this was mentioned in one of the metal ray tracing talks, is that shadows really help to ground objects. Like here, the ball looks like it's almost floating in midair, but here you can see it really grounds it, and that's really useful. That's a very powerful perceptual or a useful perceptual cue. So the basic syntax is like this. You can say, I want ray tracing. You can specify your number of image samples. So here I'm using very few image samples. So you can see, because this is Monte Carlo simulation, there's the speckle in the image, but you can increase that to more image samples, and then the image becomes a lot smoother. You can, so this is with one bounce of light. Light hits an object and reflects off it, and light the points that effectively light doesn't reach or can't, the points where the rays of light can't bounce back to the light, or we can't trace them back to the light, they end up in shadow. So this is just with one bounce, and you can see we get shadows. With two bounces, we start to get this feeling of the tint coming through, and then with three bounces, it increases more. The light bounces around the scene more. You're getting the red and the green and the blue bouncing off here. And the more you bounce the light around the scene, the closer you get to what they call global illumination. So the scene becomes brighter as light just bounces around it. So we're getting all those effects. There are a lot of other visual effects that we can implement with this, but we've just kept it kind of small for the moment for this prototype. It's really your interest and the interest in this will drive our development forward in this. So please like it. Caustics, reflection, refraction, motion blur. We've implemented it for transparency as well. So for instance, here you can see the light falling through the transparent surface, and you can see the shadows here where a surface is more opaque, as in this right example. The shadows are hard shadows, they're dark, but for our soft shadows, the light's coming through, and you can see the shadows diminishing as light travels through it. The colored transparent material acts like filters, so you can see as the light shines through here, it casts like a blue filtering effect on the ground. Here as well, as light travels through, the red and the blue, the tints and the colors of those come through as well. So just a very important quick things to look at. Floors are really nice for these. So where you do have other objects in a scene where the light can bounce off, or where you can have the shadows, that makes a big visual difference. Cases where it doesn't make a huge difference is if they're, like here, there's very little difference between the the ray traced and the rasterized image, it's because there's nothing for the shadows to fall on. These our typical lighting includes 4 different lights, so there's lights hitting this from all over. There's nothing really for the light to bounce off, and the light so scenes where light hits an object and just bounces off into space, the ray tracing would be wasted on. And it would just, so you can see there's not a big visual improvement with ray tracing in such scenarios. I'm out of time, but just a quick note, there's a lot to do that we can take this forward. We would like to implement it for Windows using DirectX ray tracing there. This is accelerated on GPUs, so it is interactive, which is brilliant. And this can really enhance and improve some of your 3D graphics, especially for presentation. They could be great. Yeah, so interest in this and feedback will help drive this forward. Thank you again just so much for listening in on my talk. I hope that this tantalizes you and excites you about some of the new features coming, and like the polyhedron, which is already here, which will help, and the AxisBox, which can will be, I think, of great use to many of our users. Thank you so much for your time. If you've got questions, please you can post them on the Zoom chat or on the talk, or after this there, as John Fultz mentioned, I think it's actually ongoing now. There's an office meetup for the front-end team, and I'll be there as well, and you're welcome to bounce questions off us. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the conference. Bye. Definitely want it for Windows as well. Okay, brilliant. We'll definitely try to implement it for Windows. New polyhedron feature is great. Yeah, great stuff, long awaited. Will it support caustics? If for caustics, we've still got some implementation to do. We've got a backward ray tracer, but as I understand it, we either need a forward path tracer or we need like photon mapping. So caustics would like to implement photon mapping. And basically interest will determine if we're going to do that. Interest will drive. But it would be a very cool effect to implement. Thanks, Sylvia, for asking the question. And then I'm just looking for other questions in the chat. Okay, very cool. It would be great if the ray tracing system exposes interface to users so users can plug in their own shader program pieces. We can look at that, as Sylvia. We can definitely look at that, especially with the stuff Yutsu's done with surface appearance. We could try to bring that in. I can see the use for bringing this to life in many simulation movies. I want it on Windows. Yes, we will try. This is only available in Mac. That's right. I'm kind of working through the questions backwards. Okay, so good choice. Coloring is targeted and subtle, not global. WL can provide that level of customization. Great. If it's for axes, yeah, the axes can be, the coloring of the axes is totally customizable. Refractive index of transparent objects, good question. That's just taking the implementation forward. For now, we just did a very simple, try to match it up to our current transparency. But yeah, we should introduce Snell's law for refracting, and what we'd have to do there as well is add a bunch of extra material properties as well to make the ray tracing like work with that. So typically, I think you'd have a refractive index that you would specify with your material. So we'll need to implement that kind of stuff. So it's still just a prototype now, but definitely we can look at bringing that in. Just going through questions. So coloring ticks and labels. Do you expect a color function to apply to just the curve or also to the ticks and tick labels? I'll have to, that's Brett's question, good. Can we specify curved axes using an equation? I think we could, and dynamics will definitely feature there. So you should be able to use curved axes. Convert contour line to ticked axes. That's a cool idea. Tell you what, guys, I'm going to switch over to the office meeting, and then that would actually be a great place to continue some of the questions. Thank you guys for all sitting in on this chat, and yeah, hopefully we can take these things forward. And the interest as well already should be a great step at pushing these things forward. Thanks, guys. Enjoy the conference.